committed to no police in schools. You know, I committed to that. I'm pledging that as well. I don't want police in school. I think that's a starting point. People don't understand the triggers that are in place when police are in schools for young, Indigenous, you know, Black, and a lot of BIPOC communities. I know a lot of even our communities who are, you know, consistently being called terrorists. I think that it goes across the board. So I think that that's, again, it's the first step. But that's a step to start off that next generation in some peace. You know, let's not go into schools. Let's not do that. Let's not treat people that we're doing outside of schools to young people. Let's try to at least avoid that. But that racism is inherent, and I think that the real question is that it's never not been inherently racist. It's never not been inherently, you know, biased. It's never not been inherently, you know, created to racially profile certain groups of people. It's always been that way. So what we're really talking about is, and I recognize we always want to talk about building bridges. We're not building bridges. We are creating bridges. Those bridges have never been there. They've never been there. The only difference between then and now is that now people have been empowered to speak their voice, to stand in their truth, to stand in their power and speak loudly. That is why these conversations are now happening, but they've always existed.
Well, I think actually there's huge need for training with police. I think there's actually a need for not only actually two things that we've actually proposed. One is actually increasing the level of training and level of professionalization among the police force. Make sure they have more consistent and ongoing training and more connection to the community. I think it's, you know, lifelong learning is extremely important, and police are no different. You know, you just can't expect someone to go out and get a 1 day a year training or on something and then, you know, that's it, a little bit of recertification once in a while. You actually need this on a constant basis, thinking about like what it is we're doing what they are doing as a police force. The second one is actually also providing mental health supports for police officers and emergency personnel. They deal with some terrible situations. Now, I keep going back to the military, but I think the reason for this is in the military, you go on a mission, you go away for 11 months, and you come back and you get, you know, you meet social workers, you meet the psychologists, you get some decompression training, you get this evaluation, and you try and prevent PTSD. But police officers, they go in, many of them, day after day after day, year after year, and they don't get those supports. And I think it starts becoming an us versus them mentality. And so I think that's part of the problem, is ensuring that the police, the firefighters, the paramedics actually have a sense that they can have those supports. And they can make those connections in the community. They can feel supported in their job. And I know it sounds like maybe it sounds very simple, but sometimes we just, you know, see them as like the enemy. But, you know, they don't want to be the enemy. They want to be part of the community. They want a better community. But I think we've put them in the impossible situation of trying to be the Swiss Army knife to every issue in our city. And you can't build a city without the proper tools. You can't build a house with a Swiss Army knife.
I believe that the Winnipeg Police Service, just like every other organization in Winnipeg, is well represented, like represents the community at large. I think that within the Winnipeg Police Service, there are individuals who would be identified from all kinds of different groups and organizations. And there's no doubt in my mind that from time to time, bad things happen and people make bad decisions, okay? Like I'm not naive to that, but at the same time, I don't believe that systemic racism, because systemic means that it's built in, that it's baked into the policies and procedures, and I don't believe that that's true. I believe that there may be individuals who make bad choices from time to time, and those people need to be disciplined. But, you know, quite frankly, I think that the time is now for us to start recognizing and celebrating the fact that every single person in Winnipeg is a Winnipegger first and foremost, and I am done with labels.
Who might look different than you, and they are working down the street and they need support, and they feel that when the police comes to provide the support that they are, that it's their job to do, they feel that they're not respected. They feel that the way they're calling, let's say, the clothing they're wearing, it's completely inappropriate. They call it a costume, let's say.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they don't feel safe about. They don't feel the safety and respect to be able to make the concern and receive the safety and support from the police.
You know, people who look differently than me and experience that, my message is, you know, people who look like me experience that too. We are all Winnipeggers, right? There was recently an incident in St. James where there was a home invasion in progress. 911 was called, and the victims of that crime were advised that the Winnipeg police would not be responding at all. That's disgusting. It's not. So what I'm trying to say is that the limitations that we have on police services in the city today are not down to one group of people. All Winnipeggers are experiencing it. All Winnipeggers are experiencing a lack of responsiveness from our Winnipeg Police Service and a lack of respect from our Winnipeg Police Service.
Dismiss the other that there is systemic racism within policing. So, you know, I'd love to give you a chance to kind of to expand on that, because there are issues with, you know, recruitment. There are issues, so who gets recruited and how they are recruited. But more importantly, there's a very specific practice that the Winnipeg Police Service have. It's called smart policing, and or data-driven policing. And what that is they put the majority of their resources, they base them on crime statistics, and they put the majority of their resources in the areas where they have a number of calls. So
doesn't that make sense? Why wouldn't they put the resources in the areas where the greatest number of calls are? That makes a lot of sense to me.
What happens, though, unfortunately, though, is those are neighborhoods, just as you mentioned earlier, those are often neighborhoods that are that have more poverty, and so the more police are in there, they actually discover more crime, so more police then get there, and there's a downward spiraling effect.
I'm a North, you know what, I'm a North End girl. I grew up in the North End, okay? I just want you to know that. The majority of derelict houses are in the North End. The majority of the gang houses and the trap houses are in the North End and the core area. I think that we all agree on that. And so it stands to reason that that's where the Winnipeg Police Service deploy the majority of their resources. So I kind of reject your premise on that one. But at the same time, you know, again, poverty, homelessness, and addictions all spiral together. Like, it's interconnected. These things are not one or the other, and they don't exist in vacuums, and they don't exist separately. And that is why my plan for Winnipeg focuses on jobs and money, derelict housing, solving the homeless problem, and actually getting everybody housed, driving up private sector wages, and helping to lift people out of poverty. Because all of those things are going to contribute to a reduction in the amount of crime that's happening in the city.
I did want to finish that one point, though. Yeah. So, because the issue is like, because it will lead to the next question, is that what police do is they don't just stop quote-unquote bad guys in the areas. They stop anybody, and they question them on a regular basis in those areas. And that's why the Police Accountability Coalition came about, is it was very much organizations whose own staff were being stopped on a regular basis. We have, you know, you've mentioned recent incidents. There's a recent incident of a woman who's driving a truck home, and they surrounded her. And it was her father's truck, but she was an Indigenous woman driving an expensive-looking truck. And so the assumption was made that it was stolen. And so she was surrounded and held at gunpoint.
It's really surprising to me that the police have the resources to do that, but not respond to a home invasion in progress or to arrest a bad guy who is out on bail right now who tried to stab my dad.
That's because the police were elsewhere?
Maybe it is, but these are the types of things that we need to look into, right?
I think one of the things that, you know, is changing, and I've seen this through the police force, some of the police officers that I meet, is we are starting to see you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color in the police force. And I think from the hiring perspective, and this is the other thing I was looking at from a leadership perspective, is going forward we need to make sure that we're hiring individuals who represent Winnipeg, you know, from different communities. And I think that's really starting to happen in the police force, and it's actually having a change. It may be slower than some people would like, but it is there. And then, you know, again, we need to do a lot more training with our officers, and I think a lot of them would actually agree with that statement. They would love to have more training. They would love to have more training on the social issues that you know, people in Winnipeg face. And that training can only be done by the specific groups that is affected by, you know, the issues. And so they need to be open to that. We need to include more of that training within the police service.
Okay, so lots of people default to training. So
Yeah.
there, because we all, we have unconscious bias. That's the thing.
Sure we
and
do.
Then, and
Yeah.
that's something that needs to be dealt with, and that can be dealt with through training. But out and out racism cannot be. You
It's
can't
not.
train racism
Yeah.
out of somebody.
No.
So, and what are we going to do when we've got either a racist individual or a policy that is in fact racist because it impacts a particular group more than it impacts another, or the dominant group?
Exactly.
So, if that's what we're trying to get at with this question. What about that?
Yeah, and I personally, I would come back to leadership on this one. And that is why we need to make sure that we have a leader, in the force who can deal with that. It's not acceptable. And I'm telling you that after years of meeting a lot of different police officers, there are a lot of officers who would also say that's not acceptable. They do not want to work with people who are overtly racist or judging people. They don't want that. And so we need to weed that out of the police service. And it needs to be dealt with. There needs to be repercussions for that and discipline. And I would like to see, whoever is a future leader of the police service work towards that. The city is, the police service is governed by a police board. And that board, I think, also has a responsibility to make sure that those situations are dealt with as well, and that they're not on the street, because I got to be, totally frank about that, is that they give people a bad name. They give other police officers a bad name, and it just perpetuates, it makes it much harder for the good police officers to be good at their job because these people are on the street and acting in that way.
Do you not think police officers themselves have a responsibility, though, to kind of also, leadership is leadership, it's very important, but, then, because there is, amongst some police officers, I know good police officers too, so, but among some police officers, but, and the good ones will also admit there is a culture of us against them. And because you can get representation in the police force, but if the culture says it's all of us against them, how are we going to get past that?
Yeah, it is, and I think it really, it does. It starts with the individual police officers, because you're not going to have a, sergeant or somebody always hearing about every instance of, overt racism. It's just not going to happen. So, it's really important that I think that, again, you hire the people who just naturally that is not the way they would act to other people. And then when they do, you call them out for that kind of thing. You don't have to call people out in public, but at first you can start with private. But you do need to be, we in business, we would just never accept that kind of thing. And so our staff would never accept that kind of thing from other people. And so in that sense, it's a little bit of the peer pressure within an organization needs to be positive, not, oh, I can't say anything for fear of getting backlash. It's like, no, we need to do the right thing here, and we need to motivate and encourage each other to do the right thing. And that's, again, what I would like to see the leadership make sure that they're promoting and inspiring within the force, is that you don't have to feel like you need to hide those kinds of things or hide from that kind of conflict. Is you need to bring it out, you need to call it out when it happens and make sure that doesn't happen again.
It's just a follow-up of the previous one. As I've already mentioned, there's a need for more education and training, and it should be more than that. I think we need to implement more stringent actions, like some kind of a law that will say, if this happens, because if someone should do something and there's no penalty or something, okay, it's normal, it's something that we should be doing. But I think there's a need for us to have more stringent rules and more plans apart from enlightening people, because I think everyone is important. And this is my own platform, that our great city, Winnipeg, needs a voice that can speak for everyone. We should be able to recognize that no matter where the person comes from, we need to respect and appreciate everyone equally. Exactly. And I think it will be like a check for everyone to make sure that this is not ideal and it is not acceptable. You know, the moment you have some facts, if there is no kind of a policy or kind of regulations in place, anybody will just do whatever they like, right? But the moment you have something in place, people will say, you know what? We need to respect one another. We need to care for each other. We need to love each other, you know? So, and I've heard a lot of stuff about racism stuff, and like mine. We need to improve on this. And I will be honest with you, we need to improve on this.
I will continue to build on, as mayor, sitting on the police board, and as mayor, continue to build on the work that we started. I started when I was chair of the police board. We put into place a bias-free policing policy. And I know the police do and need to continue to do training regarding, you know, bias in their work. It's beyond, you know, it's certainly police are at the front end of it, at the front end of things, but that really needs to happen throughout our whole organization. For example, I know within our city staff, we've done training for our city staff related to, as part of the calls to Truth and Reconciliation calls, to make sure city staff have an understanding of the impact of residential schools and the lingering effects of it. And so we've trained our city staff as well, right? And it's bias training. So yes, to train police, but even beyond that, continue to train all of our city staff and help them understand.
Training is one thing, there's unconscious bias, but what would you do in the face of, like, that's a racist? And they're on the police, or that policy is a racist policy, and because it has an effect on a certain population base more.
Yeah. So if it's a policy, if it's a development of policy, again, that's where the partnerships with Indigenous organizations and others are really critical and helpful in the development of the policy. Because if we're talking and listening, then the right policies are going to get adopted and not biased, you know, policies that are laden with bias. I think that's really, really critical. You know, in policing, there's standards, right? And individuals need to be held account in accordance with those standards. If an individual officer has violated a standard, there's processes in place. Again, the police board is the body that holds to account the police service. The legislation says making sure that policing is delivered in the community in a manner that is consistent with the needs, the values, and the expectations of the community. That's the provincial law. That's the kind of policing we need to make sure is being delivered, and I would work very hard to make sure that that's the kind of police service we have.
Well, just because, you know, I said in my life, I understand a little bit about that, because it was, you know, when I was running away from gay bashers, thinking I was running into police, I would end up with some pretty unpleasant experiences there. And I'm not importing that or saying it's equivalent or anything. I'm just saying I just had some very different experiences than a lot of my other friends who weren't gay experiences. You really need, it's a hard question, because my sense is that there's a couple of cultures in the police department. There's a younger culture of change, of people who have come into policing to change this. They are much smaller in numbers. One of my friends, some of my friends are retired police officers. They understand the culture of that. I think that obviously hiring practices change, but a total cultural shift in policing and what policing is. Right now, we're accredited through the U.S. We're accredited on a U.S. model. So creating a Canadian police accreditation system. Having a community discussion about what is the role of policing and rewriting the job descriptions of the police service and police officers through a community engagement process would be important. Looking at the work that police are doing right now that they probably should not be doing, and starting a restructuring and reassignment of some responsibilities and redefining police within the community. Bringing in better oversight, and that is going to be the challenge, because I'm not sure what that structure would look like, given how hard, I mean, I don't think the police board has worked. I think it's been, in spite of people's best efforts, it's not doing the job that people had hoped it would do. And but how do you deal with the issue of policing, particularly within communities of color, but within Indigenous communities? It's interesting, when we did the land treaty entitlement agreements, when Jenny Gervasi, Dan Vandel, and I did back when I was mayor the first time. when they're expressing sovereignty and they do a TLE, we sign an agreement where they actually have taxing authority, like at Capiong, at Long Plain, and they can choose policing. There's some agreement about when and what terms police can enter on that. But it's interesting that expression of doing treaty land entitlement, development and sovereignty, that had to be negotiated. And I think it's interesting that we've already had at least 2 and probably 3 negotiated agreements on how policing would work. And it'll be interesting with the down at the Capiong site, because that's quite a large scale thing. And I think there's maybe some lessons in what is the relationship to policing and treaty lands and Indigenous sovereignty might be taken from the frameworks that are coming when we had permission to police and negotiate agreements. And when I think people were surprised when those conversations started, that it wasn't just transactional, how do you pay for police or how does that work, but a very different conversation about what that might look like and how they would police. And so I think there's a little opportunity there to learn something from that process and see if some of those ideas and some of those relationships are scalable.
So there are 2, and I think some people mix these things together, but there are 2 separate but related conversations around policing. In my head, there's police financing, and then there's addressing the systemic racism that is a part of the Winnipeg Police Service. So we've talked about the police financing, and then we'll talk now about some of my thoughts about addressing the systemic racism that's in the Winnipeg Police Service. So obviously, policing has a continual process of being modernized. When I talk to police officers, especially retired ones, so yeah, we were treated like we were trained as warriors. Those are the skills that we were given. But in our 30-year career, the type of work that we're doing is just so radically different. But we were not trained with conflict resolution. We were not trained to understand how racism impacts each of our minds and how we view a situation, or to know what might be going on underneath what we're seeing here, or to connecting people to resources that they need because they're struggling. They don't have those tools. So I think with all a lot of retirement and police officers that are coming up, we really have to focus on diversity, and not just more women, more people with visible minorities, but different kinds of skill sets. So I think that's really important. I mean, I do also like the idea of, in some situations, like if there's a call comes in from the library, 911, there's somebody that's drunk and causing a problem, the person can say, this is not a dangerous situation, but it's an urgent situation. Then somebody can come that's got the right skill set. You don't need to send an armed police officer. But I mean, I think that's also complementary to just looking and say, well, this guy's been here drunk every day for 3 months. And at some point, just sending someone different, we have to realize that's not the solution. The guy needs a supportive housing and access, if he wants it, to addictions treatment or whatever. So I think it's a combination of a bunch of things, and we have an opportunity to see that kind of renewal.
Once again, I'll go back to the Office of Civic Engagement. I believe the mayor should engage all citizen-based organizations and to educate organizations that there is a Office of Civic Engagement to start the process of hearing lived experiences of our citizens to affect the necessary policy changes within city government.